right. So we were talking about having control or not. Um, Locus of control is referring to your perception of what controls outcomes in your life. So, for example, if you have an internal locus of control, you have a general sense that you control your own outcomes, that you're the one who makes things happen. You perceive yourself to have the freedom to make different choices and different decisions. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but you believe that you are, that you have that kind of control. You believe that your own skills and effort and stick to itiveness will get you where you want to go. These are all aspects of an internal locus of control. They describe it, see all the arrows going outward? They describe it as being a person feeling like they inside themselves control all these things out in the world. And some things that you probably don't actually control. Like there are certain things that you have no control over. One of the things that this pandemic really brought into stark reality for all of us is that, we really don't have control over which viruses we inhale, right? We don't have control over that. I had a student who told me that she was very upset that her family in January all caught COVID. Her biggest fear throughout the pandemic up until January of 2022 had been that she would catch it and give it to her mom and grandma who have comorbidities. Well, her mom and grandma did catch it, but they had absolutely no symptoms. Like they tested positive, but no symptoms. Her children caught it, and she was really concerned. What if the kids the kids had no problems at all. But she was like, I failed because we caught this. That's a very powerful internal locus of control to think that, you can move through the world and never catch an airborne communicable disease. Like that's a really powerful internal locus of control, and probably not accurate. Like we can't really have control over everything like that. I'm kind of in the midst of this right now because I don't know what anybody has because nobody's been tested, but everybody in my family currently is sick. Not me yet, but I feel like I've got a target on my back, and not my son yet. But and my mom hasn't been around us. We kept her away as soon as my daughter started to get sick, and we're like, okay, we don't need to be seeing grandma right now. But so everybody's been catching this, whatever this illness is. Might be COVID, might be something else. I don't know. And it's like, who brought this home? Right? Like, who did this? That's a very internal locus of control question to ask about a communicable disease. Right? Like, who brought this home? How would you know? I mean, honestly, did we used to do this with colds and flu? We'd ask everybody who brought this home. Not really. But now with this, we feel like we should be able to control it. And that's an internal locus of control. Now, the external locus of control is much more, see how all the arrows are going toward the individual. So things happen to the individual. It's much more fate-based, like things are just going to happen and I really don't have any control over it. If you look at the scales that are used to measure internal versus external, you'll notice that on the external locus of control, the attributions are things like God will decide, or powerful people will decide what happens to me, and that my hard work is not going to get me where I want to go because powerful people will interfere, or there's no point in doing, I don't know, routine checkups because, God's plan will be fulfilled, like that kind of thing. That's an external locus of control where you feel like things happen to you and that maybe your life was already predetermined, or the system set up against you. That's an external locus of control. Now, this difference in approach to the world is they're hotly debated whether this is something that you're born with or something that you learn. It's really hotly debated. You can kind of imagine that if you've had a life where random bad things happened to you, and there was, no matter how diligent, no matter how good, no matter how hard you tried, these random bad things kept happening to you, you can imagine that that would foster an external locus of control. Like you can imagine that would be a really reasonable response in that kind of circumstance to develop this external locus of control. Some people argue that it might be based on culture, right? That maybe more individualistic cultures would have more internal locus of control, but it doesn't really pan out like that. There are externally locused people in individualistic cultures, there are internally locus people in collectivistic cultures. Something that I've noticed when I do research using college students is that the college students tend to lean towards internal locus of control. And I wonder if it's because if you don't have at least some degree of internal locus, the value of going to college probably wouldn't make a lot of sense. Like it's not going to help me anyway. So why would I try and create my future when my future has already been determined by fate, or the system or whatever. So that might help to explain why when I've tried to use this as a variable and I use college students as my subject, I tend to get way, like almost everybody is on the internal side of locus of control. So if that description was sounding more like you, I'm not surprised. It's very common for college students to have more of an internal locus. Most people are not one or the other. Most of us are, it's a continuum. And so most of us are, somewhere towards the middle, but among college students, you tend to lean towards the internal side of the continuum more than the external on average. But you can see even in this picture, I found this on the internet and I liked it because they drew the picture looking kind of sad in the external locus of control. And there's that sort of helplessness that goes along with feeling like random bad things are happening to you and there's nothing that you can do about it to get it to stop or to change the outcomes. So having an external locus of control may contribute to higher levels of sadness. Definitely contributes to higher levels of depression. What about explanatory style? Again, this might be something, this is debated. Is it innate or is it taught? Optimism versus pessimism. So pessimists like Eeyore, they expect things to go badly. They blame others when things go badly. Optimists, on the other hand, expect to have control. So optimists typically score higher on the internal locus of control. Optimists tend to work well under stress and have fewer negative side effects of stress. And they tend to have good health. They tend to enjoy their good health longer in their lifetime too. So is it innate? Is it learned? Well, when we see that explanatory style seems to run in families, you might say, oh, well, it's genetic. But we got to remember, families provide our genes and our environments, typically. So when we say it runs in families, it may or may not be completely genetic, but they have found a genetic marker that is present in people who are optimistic and not present in people who are pessimistic. So, usually most factors are not governed by a single gene. So having found a genetic marker that is associated with one style versus the other doesn't mean that that's the thing that causes optimism or pessimism. They do see biologically higher levels of oxytocin among optimists than among pessimists. Oxytocin is the cuddle hormone, they call it. It's the hormone that after giving birth, women excrete, right, a bunch of oxytocin, and it makes them feel bonded to their babies right away. Whereas, like the dads might have to spend time getting to know their baby and be around and support them. And then they grow to love their babies in the same passionate way that that the moms like pretty instantly start to feel. And that's because of oxytocin. So a lot of times when we see higher levels of oxytocin in people, we see more connection with other people. Oxytocin can be a calming hormone that makes a person feel more secure. So that might contribute to their optimism as well, right? Like having that sensation that I'm secure might make it possible for me to feel optimistic. Now, Danner and colleagues they did a study of nuns, and they looked at the diaries that the nuns had written like 60 years ago, and then looked at their health and how old they were when they died and other kinds of things, 6 decades later. And what they found is that those whose journals from their youth were most full of optimism had the longest lifespan, very strongly. Like the difference was 2.5 times the number of years longer lived if they had lots of optimism in their journal. So what Danner and colleagues were kind of arguing is that this is something that sort of gets set up when we're very young and then has lifelong benefits for health, to have this optimistic, positive outlook on life. So it then becomes really important to wonder, is this something that we're born with, or is this something that we could really foster, right? Like if I foster an optimistic viewpoint in myself, will I get the biological benefits over my lifespan? And we don't really know whether that happens or not. In the Danner study, obviously they used stuff that the person had written when they were younger to determine whether they were optimistic or not. And then they just followed to see how long they lived, right? So we don't know whether you could change your viewpoint and look at things from a glass half full rather than glass half empty sort of way. Social support. Close relationships give us an opportunity for open heart therapy, they call it, since so much of the sort of physical effects of stress, or in our case, the carrying around the burden of sadness, is heart disease. Little play on that phrase. We're going to have open heart therapy, right? A chance to maybe confide some of your painful feelings and alleviate some of your own sadness. Maybe by sharing it with someone else, it'll actually make it less. So again, let's look at some research. In cohabiting couples, support from the partner, both visible support and invisible support, and I'll tell you what that is in a second, was associated with less sadness. So visible support, so what they did in the study was actually pretty clever. They had cohabiting couples. They might have been married or not, it didn't matter, as long as they lived together and they were romantic partners. And they asked each of them to report things that they had done. They would get a little tone on their phone, and they were told, write in your journal about what you have done today to support your partner. And then the researchers compared what each member of the couple said they had done and also what they said they had received from their partner. So you were supposed to make a list of what you had done for your partner and a list of what you had received from your partner as far as support, right? The visible support would be the things that the partner said they did and the other partner said they received. So, I filled my partner's gas tank when I used the car, and the partner says, my partner filled the gas tank with gas when they used my car. So that would be a visible support. Invisible support would be, I said I filled the gas with the car with gas, and the partner never acknowledges having had that happen. So it's invisible support. They're not aware it happened. It turned out it doesn't matter whether it was visible or invisible. Those cohabiting couples who provided support to each other had, the member who was receiving support showed less sadness. If you have a partner who's showing support and trying to make your life easier and things like that, that's associated with less sadness. Tears of sadness elicit social support. This comes from Pineros-Liano and et al. So when we cry, it oftentimes lets the people around us know, no, I'm actually upset. Like, a lot of times when we're sad, if we feel rejected or we feel like we lost something or we were passed over or something, when we feel sad, a lot of times we come off as kind of angry, right? We're a little easy to irritate. Instead of saying, oh, I'm really sad and I feel like crying, we're like just kind of snippy. Snippy makes the other person want to kind of fight back. But if you cry out of sadness and you're like, I didn't get the job or whatever, that elicits social support from the people around you. It makes them aware that you need some support. Like you wouldn't be crying if you didn't need some support. And then finally, among Latina mothers, a lack of social support was associated with higher levels of sadness. So I think I pulled these three just as examples of a wide body of research that has shown sadness as a sort of dependent variable. And then this evidence that social support seems to be a buffer to sadness. Even if you're feeling sadness beforehand, getting social support helps you to, get through or get over that emotion. So social support is a really super important aspect of combating sadness. All right, let's go ahead and stop here, and we will finish up this section by talking about ways to reduce the stress of sadness.